Thank you.
I'll look at it. I haven't looked at it yet. You're on the board of this? All right, we're going to go ahead and get started this time. We'll call the school board meeting to order. I want to welcome everybody here. Hope everyone had a great holiday break, great Christmas, and Hanukkah and everything else that you celebrate, as well as a safe and happy New Year. At this time, I will lead us in an invocation. We will do our pledge. We will skip through some of the other formalities we normally go to. We will then go to open for public comment. I'd ask if you please stand at this time. I'll lead us in the invocation and we'll pledge allegiance. God, we come before you today, humble and grateful, thankful for who you are and the blessings you provide. We thank you for this new year that you provided for us to make a positive difference in the lives of the students that have been entrusted to our care. We ask that you lead and guide all the decisions that we make that might ultimately lead to what is best for the community that we serve and bring honor and glory to you. It's in Christ's name that I pray. Amen.
Amen.
If you'll join me in the pledge. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Yeah. And then, board, again, with your indulgence, we'll skip through some of the other formalities we normally do. We'll get right to our business. You're good with that, I assume? Yes. And then I would just ask, if you haven't already, please silence any cell phone or electronic device that you have with you.
Are you talking to me?
No.
Bag full right
It's
now.
not directed at anybody.
Since I went off during the pledge.
Yeah, or the prayer.
The prayer.
Okay,
Yeah.
Clarence, it was directed at you.
And then this is time for open for public comment. We do have Ms. Carius that signed up to speak, and so I'd invite you to come up to the lectern if you would. And then you know the routine, but 3 minutes to address the board. If you'd please state your name and address for the record.
Okay. Leah Carius, 1049 Nash Drive, Celebration, Florida, 34747. Thank you for the opportunity to let me speak about legislative priorities because they are so important. And I continue to be a strong advocate with the Florida PTA, and we've been working on our legislative agenda. And as always, funding, of course, is high on the list. And we have a promise made by Governor Scott that he wants to return it to the highest levels from 2007. So we want to keep the pressure on to make him keep to that promise because we really obviously need those dollars, and that solves a lot of our problems everywhere across the board, from the capital improvements to wages and keeping our teachers here in the county that on a livable wage. And second, besides funding, what I've really come to learn talking to the different legislators, there really is movement on the high stakes testing. With the new legislators that have been brought in, a lot of them campaigned on those types of things, and so I think they really see the need to make the test mean something and not just be for testing's sake. And so that, along with looking over what we require on a district level, limit our kids to all this testing, because it really is a stressful situation, as you all know. I'm obviously preaching to the choir here. And third, bullying is always a very high priority. And what I've come to find out with my community involvement has been the way to put money toward really helping with the bullying problem tends to be with the buses. There are a lot of buses, that's where kids get bullied a lot. Bus stops, on the buses, back and forth, that pent-up energy on those long bus trips. And I really think that a good use of money would be looking into funding having a monitor on each bus, so the bus driver can concentrate on their important job of driving the bus and have a true adult on there that can monitor the students' behavior. And I think that will be more productive than the random searches that we're producing now. And because it is consistent, and it's those kinds of things, the consistent, everyday things that are more of a deterrent than anything than the random searches. And that's really all I wanted to bring forward.
Great.
Thank you.
And you did good, Leah. That was only 2 minutes, 23 seconds. So you were on. You were on. You thought I wasn't watching, but I was. Board, here's what I thought we would do is, obviously we're here to discuss one singular item today, which is our legislative priorities. Mr. Boyd has worked with the leadership team to put together a packet for us. I'd ask that we work through the packet, collect thoughts and questions. I know board members have individual ideas that you want to talk about and look at as well. We'll let Mr. Boyd finish up his presentation, then we'll go through some questions on some of the initiatives that are being brought to us, some of the ones that we've already been working on, and then we'll have some dialogue about what it is that each individual wants as well. We do have our lobbying team here with us as well to help provide some guidance and insight for us. Make sure that as we have these conversations, we stay focused on what's actually achievable, and we don't try to go down a road that ultimately is not going to be able to be achieved as we go into this session. So, are we good, Board? Okay. So, Mr. Boyd, I'll turn it over to you at this time, and I'll just start by first thanking you again for all your work. I know you do a lot to get this pulled together for us, and it's appreciated. So, thanks.
Board, in the packet before you on the second page is an at-a-glance overview of the priorities that staff had indicated to me, and I will briefly summarize them, and I will have supporting documents for each one for you to review in your own time after this meeting, but also for any points of discussion. This is a working draft, therefore indicated on each page, because we need your input to make it a complete final draft. So, in summary, our top priorities are: 1, a sustained accountability reform that supports Osceola's student achievement goals; 2, Osceola's capital funds; and 3, Osceola's English language learners, which we've gotten some recent information that changes that priority somewhat and opens an opportunity for others. Priority issues, page 3 of 11. The sustained accountability reform that we're discussing. In each of the priorities that are in this booklet, the format follows as the issue is stated in italics. Recommendations from staff are after that. Current laws impacted are after that. A background is provided, references and resources, and then a contact person for each of the priorities. So that's the format for each of the priorities. This first one, I worked with Superintendent Luciano as we reviewed the priorities of all of the state organizations, FADS, FSBA, including the Central Florida School Boards Coalition. We put together this information with the emphasis being that we need time to get things right. It's not that we oppose the reforms, it's that we need time to get things right if we're going to meet the standards that the legislature has set. That's the theme. So each of those things that are summarized under the recommendation are along that theme. We need time for professional development for Osceola educators that addresses changes in state law, improves classroom instruction, and increases student achievement. We need time for the development of valid and reliable end-of-course assessments that measure student achievement in compliance with the laws. We need time for appropriate adjustments to the educator evaluation systems based on those assessments. And we need time for effective communication of requirements of the new accountability reforms, including the new school grades formula, to our teachers, students, parents, and community members. The laws impacted are multiple. And yes, multiple state organizations are working on this. If you look on page 4, there is a timeline of why this is one of our priorities as staff. In red, you will see that there are several laws that have been passed in recent years, and I'm sure you're familiar with them because you've heard from your constituents and our teachers. Those are in such magnitude and in such a short, compressed amount of time that we've not had time as districts in Florida to respond. We've been bombarded. That's the word I would use.
John, just quick question. Is this something, I'm assuming this is something we're not going alone. Is the Florida Association going through these also? Or is this something that's impacting us disproportionately for some reason?
You're correct. It is more of a statewide issue and not just Osceola specific, but it does impact us very significantly.
I get the impact. I just want to.
Yes, sir.
So who is kind of carrying this? Or is that what we're here to determine today?
Well,
Is that a state association lobbyist? Is that Mike? Is that Howard?
what you said is the truth. It's for the board to determine
Okay.
today, because you're right. We do have state organizations that are lobbying this issue.
Okay. I think part of that too then, because that was the same thing I was jotting down, Clarence, is who is kind of at the tip of the spear on this, and if FSBA or FADS or others are already working on this, then if this is determined to be something that we want to be a part of, then we can issue a statement saying that we support the initiatives underway by the FSBA or otherwise. Whether or not it becomes something that we're championing and making our singular or sole priority, not necessarily maybe, but maybe instead just putting an issue out that we support.
Well, each one of the documents you sent, each one of those organizations, and this was
Yes, sir.
right there.
Right.
And multiple school boards also. I mean,
And that's what I figured. I just want to make
Yeah.
sure, I guess from my standpoint, that we've got a couple different resources. And I guess I would rather our couple different resources be focused on what maybe they're best suited to focus on, and not all three of them doing the exact same thing. I'm not sure if Mike, that makes.
And you've also got, from a legislative perspective, I know in my own personal conversations, you got Senator Soto and Senator Monfort on board with certain elements of it. I mean, they're tackling, I know that it's not on here specifically, but one of the issues we've got right, and I apologize about my voice, one of the issues we've got right now is our EOCs, end of course exams for high schools have been moved up a month. So you get one less month of, to teach physics, chemistry, et cetera, then you gotta take that test. Senator Soto is taking on that testing schedule. Senator Monfort is taking on some things as it relates to the testing companies. So they're picking their own pieces, so to speak. And the way they'll do it, Clarence, the way it typically works, and Mike and Doug know this as well as anybody, is they will attach language to another bill being passed versus having its own bill
Sure.
to get it done, which, as long as it gets done, we don't care how they do it.
Right.
And Ms. Luciano has been working with the associations to highlight some of those areas of concern and
Okay.
highlighting some potential solutions to those areas of concerns as well.
That's what I just want to make sure I understand.
Okay, John?
Sure. Immediate following the last page of the priority as summarized is a letter from the Commissioner of the Department of Education to Senator Gates, and his letter follows. It's their exchange in regards to all these issues we've just discussed and that the state organizations are very well aware of. But I provided it as a resource for you so that you didn't have to hunt for it if you were curious.
Okay.
The next priority is on page 6 of the packet, and that is the main event, Osceola's capital funds. The information included in the background is updated for the current year and comes directly from the budget that the board approved that Mr. Cease prepared. So that data is in there, and you'll see several charts. The only change is that I added a trend line for dramatic effect.
Well, this one on page 8 is the most dramatic.
Yes, sir. As you well know, I'm sure, the capital funding is really becoming a paramount issue in our district, and I'm sure from your discussions you're aware of it, so the
Do we
information
have any
provided is there.
feel, or does anybody know across the state who else is facing this? Because I'm sure there are districts that don't need any capital, or, not everybody needs some, but very little because they're not having the growth we're experiencing. Are there 10 of 63 that have this issue, or is it
Depends on how you.
30 of 63?
Depends on how you look at the formula. Doug, Todd, and I have been working on this for a while and looking at, with some amendments to the current legislation, current law that's on the books, that it would impact 3 districts based on the way that the staff has been working on the proposal. If you eliminated some of the charter school components of that, it's in your packet, what's been worked on and what's been being reviewed. If you eliminate some of the charter school component of it, then it does open up to an additional, and I'm trying to work from memory here, but an additional 5 or 6 districts maybe. So
Who are
it
the
gets you
3?
to
Do we
about
know?
10.
Do you know those off the top of your head?
Flagler.
Lee County and St. Augustine.
No.
It's
Todd, do you
Flagler's
remember?
John?
Flagler's
The first 3 that we identified were us.
Yeah, the first 3 that was identified was Glades, Lee, and Osceola.
Right.
Now, one of the issues with this, though, just so you know from a historical perspective, is at the beginning of the school year, the state typically always underestimates student populations statewide. So that way they can put less money in. And then in the end, we've got 50,000 more students in the state than we thought, or 60,000 or whatever. That's been pretty much the chicken and the egg game they've been playing for the past 10 years at least.
The other thing I'd point out is when you look at Lee and Glades counties, correct, Lee and Glades, the difference is stark. I mean, so for Osceola, it's a $13 million shortfall, for which Glades, it was a couple $100,000 or something like that.
It was like 26,000.
Okay. And then Lee
was right around 400.
Gotcha. Mike?
Sure, and I've got a whole wrap what John's done, and part of it addresses what you're talking about, because you're spot on, Clarence and Mr. Thacker, and that's what we're going to have to deal with. That's the graph, that's the documentation. John and I have talked about this, that we need to bring to the legislature, demonstrating why Osceola County is an outlier, and we truly are. This isn't an opportunity just to get money. We genuinely are a different animal, and that's what we need to demonstrate.
That's where my
Demonstrating
questions
the
are coming.
need is good, but everybody has needs. Demonstrating why we're exceptional is what's going to be critical to this effort. And I'll get into it, but Mr. Thacker, you were spot on. Osceola is unique, and that's ultimately the message that we've got to sell and convince.
And I guess as I go through this, that's really what I'm looking for, is things that make us I'd like to be 100% unique, as opposed to 30 of 60 have this
Right.
issue.
Right.
But the issue is, well, we're unique, Clarence, and that's a fair statement. And Mike, you're spot on also. Is one of the weaknesses that we do have is that we've got 6, maybe 7 legislators that represent us. And you've got, other counties, to Mike's point, that have needs, like a Palm Beach or a Hillsborough or Dade, that have got 20, 30 that represent them. And so you've got to find a way to co-opt these other counties that have got more clout to help, and that's always been the challenge. That's just always been tough.
Board, are we okay to move on just from this for now? We're going to circle back to all of this. So. Okay.
Sure.
John?
Thank you.
Sorry, John.
That's all right, not a problem. Actually, that was what I had expected, because we still have a draft we're working from, not a problem. I wanted just to make certain, and at any point that staff would like to join in, please give me the high sign. The capital needs information you see in the burgundy and gray and white is dated from last year. Some of it still applies, but I know that Mr. Wells and his staff are still working on that. And I just wanted to point that out to you. Then immediately following that
Are there
is
material changes in that, or are we close?
I believe it's fairly close.
Okay.
It's close, we're just rolling.
All right. As long as it's close, I don't care.
But the most material change could be, Clarence, and if you look in this, if, and I'm not saying we should, if there was relief from SREF, that number could be reduced by 30 to 40%.
On page following the burgundy sheets is a draft of the statute that Mr. Cease has worked on with Mr. Bruce and Mr. Horner in regards to high growth. That is legislation that a former board member did successfully help us lobby. That was Mr. Greer. And we're looking to amend it to help us, because we are unique. And that language is there for your review.
Has a guy like Mike LaRosa seen this yet?
Yes.
Okay.
Everyone in our delegation has already seen this as a draft. This was, again, the direction that the board had given us last year. So we've been working over the last 6 to 8 months to meet with everyone in the delegation, let them know what's been a priority for us, bring this to them, make them aware of what we're proposing, get feedback from them as
How has
well.
it been received?
Very well.
All right.
How much of the 2 mills are we at now?
It's only 1.5. That's part of what makes this language not relevant any longer, is you can't levy the 2 mills, you can only levy 1.5.
Okay, because I thought we were.
Yeah, we prefer to refer to it as an update rather than amending.
Okay,
but
so it's in some ways, it's a
conforming
correction
to-
of facts.
It just conforms with the current law.
And for some perspective, in 2008, those mills was based on all of the appraised property in Osceola that have a taxable value of $28 billion. Now that same property has an appraised value of about $19 billion.
Yeah.
So that's,
Yeah, the lower the mills, the lower the values.
Right.
Somehow it's good math.
Alrighty. On page 9, the last priority is the good news. That was a priority from the former year. The legislature heard our plea. They changed the law. The DOE successfully has obtained the approval of the U.S. Department of Education. That's the letter following this priorities information to Commissioner Stewart. that states that Florida's waiver, including the language for ELL, has been approved. And thank you, Mr. Bruce, for sharing that with us. Immediately following that is information Mr. Wheeler had requested last year, and I put it in the packet for you again this year. It's the SREF versus the Florida Building Code information. And in addition to that, there's information for collaboration between charter schools and the school district on locations of new charter schools in geographic areas of need. That's just information for you. And then the last is a profile prepared by the legislature's EDR, Demographics Office, to show some of the uniqueness of our county, but not necessarily specific to our priorities at this point. I just put that in there for information.
I just want to go back to something John just said. If we prevent somehow there is a geographic preference that we can dictate to charter operators relative to where they put their schools, they could easily go back to the state and say, well, if districts can dictate where we put our schools, they've got to assign students there. That's the catch-22 of them, which I'm not saying is a good or bad thing, but that's something we need to understand, that if that does happen, they're not going to just roll over and play dead, and they do have some legislative clout. So just understand that.
Okay. John, that's it for now, right?
Yes, sir. At this time, if you noticed in the packet, the front page had blanks because we're looking to you for your priorities.
Okay.
John, are you gonna be able to work on putting together something that says this is how much of an outlier Osceola County is that Mike can then use?
Yes,
And that's
sir.
something you're gonna be able to do.
That's the intent. Yes, sir.
And we already have some of that financial
Yes.
analysis completed, and Todd's been working through that for us.
Good.
Staff and myself will work on that and make certain Mr. Horner and Mr. Bruce and Nixon receive that information, and of course, the board members prior.
All right, board, at this time, why don't we, I just passed out, Mr. Wheeler had emailed some requests in for him as well, some things that he wants us to consider. Let's go through those, and then if any other board member has anything else that you want to add, just so we kind of have everything on the table, and then we'll start taking these one by one and talking through what we think we should do. Mr. Wheeler, if you want to take the floor
Sure.
this time and walk through
Well,
yours.
the funding for capital construction improvements is pretty self-explanatory. We just went over that, and, we obviously need those needs. And I'll be honest with you, Doug and Mike, you bring them some money for that, you're heroes. I mean, that's really why we're paying you guys, is for that. More than anything else, that's what we really need from you. I mean, again, increases for wages and benefits, we know that health insurance is a huge issue. I mean, benefits is really a bigger issue than wages at this point. People aren't complaining about what they make, which is not to say they don't complain about it, but the health insurance is huge. The end-of-year testing schedule, I think that'd be an easy one to get. Now, Senator Soto is very open to that. He's also got a bug in his ear. His wife is a curriculum specialist at Orange County Schools, so he's getting, both barrels from her. But that's critical for our students and for our teachers, because our teachers have less time to teach complex data, and our kids got to learn it in one less month. And the state isn't, even despite this testing schedule, we're not even getting the results from the high schools until December. So that should be a pretty easy one, and that should make sense to everybody. The no state mandated testing prior to March and eliminate the state formula for teacher evaluations. All of this testing we're hearing about isn't about kids. It's about the teacher evaluation system that the state is dictating that every district has to use. And when we use the state formula, 90% of the students, of the teachers, are rated as highly effective. So they need to leave that alone, and also, which is not to say we would not test kids before March, but the state, I don't want the state dictating, let districts decide what, like we use STAR testing in the fall. Nobody, no other districts are using it. That's something we decide we need to do for diagnostic purposes for our students. But if the state stays out of that, that's a good thing for us. Relief from SREF, it's really an economic issue. It's not because we're trying to skirt anything. It's just we don't have enough money now. If we could build schools for 30 to 40% less, we need 30 to, instead of being $200 million, we need $140 million. It just makes it more affordable for us. And charter schools, if you walk through some of the charter schools, I don't know if you have or not, there's some good charter schools being built that don't comply with SREF that are great schools. They're beautiful schools. I mean, they're not building unsafe buildings. And there's two reasons why SREF is in place. Number one, they say to build it to a 50-year standard. That's number one. Number two, to build it to a hurricane standard. Well, you got thousands of hurricane shelters already. The state's underfunding us as it is. We need student stations. If the state's willing to fund us or fund public education so we can replace Michigan Avenue Elementary, build the new classrooms, build the new schools that we need, we wouldn't be having this conversation. But that's why we hired these guys, and that's, so that's, again, I'm not telling you that SRF is a bad thing. It's strictly a question of economics. It's what it really comes down to. So mine are pretty straightforward. I don't know if you have any questions about mine, one way or the other. Okay.
Not at the moment. Gentlemen, anything else you want to add aside from what we've already covered, or you want to start walking back through these?
Well, I just, two things. I don't know if it's necessarily additional priorities, but, so kind of go through and look for stuff that's, makes us different. This is, I look at things that really slam me. This is minorities. It's not really the foreign language speakers, but it looks somewhat similar. And when you look at the change in our population, we've got some issues that others don't have. and that's not just a bump. That's a mountain peak. So is that an area, just something for your toolkit when you talk about Osceola, why we are having some additional interest. And then I just had to read this article this morning, and y'all may have all read it, I don't know, about us. We dropped from our ranking, from 6th to 28th, which you already seen.
I saw the article.
I didn't see it.
And the interesting part of the article, it's typical, they change the way they grade it, so, and then they say you dropped.
Oh, yeah, I did see
But
that.
it's not, the thing that really bothers me in this article is not, I'll give you this one in a minute. It's, the thing that really made us drop is the chance for success index. And that's really what I think is facing this county, is our chances for success are, if this is a state issue, it's a bigger issue, I think, in our state, and it's a bigger issue somewhat because of that graph or because of the language barriers that we have of people moving in every day. And we start to kind of couple these things together. I guess I'm hoping, the only reason I gave this, I'm hoping this has an impact in Tallahassee with some of the people when they start looking at that. We're the third largest third largest state in the country now. And if we're not going to have the dollars to fund an educational system, we're in deep trouble. So we will not continue to prosper like people in Tallahassee really wants to prosper. The companies aren't coming here without good schools. So anyhow, that's the only reason. So I was really looking more from, as opposed to pure issues, you guys can figure out how to attack the issues, things that make us look different, things that make us, that are different, that we can kind of build around the strategy, I guess.
Clarence, to your point, I mean, you make a great point. As you're bringing this stuff up with legislators, what I've learned is they get it if you couch it in terms of economic development. Why why people aren't going to move for jobs or for businesses. They get that. They're not as worried, unfortunately, about a kid who can't take AP classes.
I get all that. That's
Okay.
why,
Okay,
that
good,
was the
good.
whole purpose of the article, is to start framing it back around on what the state, how the state, I mean, Governor Scott's all about jobs. That's a blow to jobs, that article, I believe.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Because nobody reads the article. All they read is we just went from 12 to 28,
Right.
Right.
I think. So,
Okay. Good. Anything else, Mr. Thacker? Mr. Booth, anything?
No,
to add at
I'd
this
just
time?
like to say, in the thoughts I had, obviously, like Jay has brought forward, the funding for capital construction, I mean, we all know that's number one. That has to be what for all the reasons that Clarence just stated, and that's how we can move forward with that. But I want to make sure that that's what we concentrate on. I do believe that, we need increases in wages and benefits, and that's great. I do believe we have these testing situation that we need to get under control, and we've got everybody working for that. I just want to make sure that what these folks are doing here is for Osceola County, and Osceola County specifically. And not that these aren't Osceola County problems, but they're also statewide problems.
and I agree with that. I think that's, I guess when we hired Mike's firm, we're looking, in my mind, when we were talking about it, was really directing him towards funding.
Capital funding, construction.
No, mine was funding.
Yeah, well,
Money is money.
Money's money.
Well, but no, they're.
Bring it all,
They
Mike.
give it to you with rules
I
and
know,
restrictions.
I get that, but I don't want him just focused purely on capital either. We need both.
So here's, and Mr. Warner, I know you want to talk as well. Here's my thoughts, guys, is that I think you know that the high growth formula has been something that's been important to me, something I've been working on. I think it's what the previous board wanted. It's my hope that it's what this current board will want. I think it's part of what we've got Mr. Bruce and Mr. Horner on the right team to help move us in the right direction to get that done. Part of what I'd like to do in the next phase of our conversation is kind of hear from them, because they're the Tallahassee experts, not us. I think part of that, and part of what I suspect we'll hear from them as well, is that we need to make sure that we don't spread too wide. We want a rifle approach and not a shotgun approach. We want to make sure that we have a very clear target on what we're going after. And so that would be my general thoughts. Everything that's been shared, these are all important. The stuff that's come from staff recommendations, from other board members, the data's being provided, all that lends to creating this, here we are, what are we going to do? Part of my personal thing would be that we make sure that we pick whatever's going to be, that we're going to have the greatest opportunity to be successful at. And if you recall, last year we had, and I don't remember what it is off the top of my head, but we had an issue that the board had talked about going after. Oh, it had to do with joint use funding. It was like, it's not going to happen. It was just too late to make it happen. And so it's kind of one of those things where you have to be able to think strategically and say, this isn't the time for this. Right now we need to go after this. This is what the landscape is available for. This is what our legislators can get done for us, a delegation can work towards, and our lobbyists can achieve. So those are just my thoughts as we frame the conversation.
I totally agree with you. What I want to make sure too, though, that we do is we give them the flexibility to adjust on the fly, because let's just say they're down to the last 3 days of legislature and somebody says, come hell or high water, I'm not passing high growth. These guys need to be able to call it something else and take off.
And to that end, I don't care what you call someone to bring back money. But Tim, I want to just point something out. I mean, part of the reason we're having the meeting right now is because Mike pointed out to us at the last board meeting that the legislative we need to be ready for the legislative delegation. And to that end, one of the things that I have seen government agencies do wrong, that we don't want to do wrong, is you go in front of the legislative delegation, say, we need money, we need money, we need money, and then they say, well, how much do you need and what's it for? And you gotta be ready to answer that question spot on and give them a handout. These are the schools we need, this is the years we need them, this is why, there's a student population, and here's the dollars we need. If we don't get SRF release, it's $220 million. If we can get SRF release, it's $155 million. And you give it to them in black and white, so there's no gray area. That's what really, and I hate to boil it down and be so finite, but that is what they'll get, and that will be the most impactful. I mean, what do you guys think?
Yeah.
I agree. Before we do, let me just also recognize Rebecca Hurd is here as well from Representative LaRosa's office, and we appreciate you being here and also the work you've been doing for us thus far. Thank you. Mr. Horner?
Thanks. Mr. Chairman, if you can indulge me, I'm just going to kind of
Yep.
dump my bucket and let you guys go from there. And so a couple things. One, I just up front wanted to compliment Mr. Boyd. I mean, he always does such a thorough job, and you already know what a star you have in him, and it's just always a pleasure to work with him. I know a couple of you worked with Doug in the past, the new members map. Just so you know, Doug Bruce with Clodney and Fast, which is one of the top 3 lobby firms in the state, has just done amazing things for this district, and is kind of a quiet hero if you don't know the history of what's happened in terms of funding. What Doug, and I'm going to ask to be indulged in a little bit of a history lesson in a second, and Doug's going to play a significant role in it. And then lastly, I just wanted, in full disclosure, say I had lunch with Mr. Soto on Wednesday because he couldn't make this meeting, obviously, and he wanted to give me his thoughts. And basically, he's right on point with you folks in terms of capital funding is clearly at the top of his mind. So one, an approach, and then two, maybe a quick history lesson if I could. So as an approach to, as Ricky was talking about, everyone's talking about funding and then everything else, maybe as you put your list together, maybe we think in terms of 2 tiers. And there's sort of tier 1 and tier 2. And you've got capital funding / high growth as tier 1. And that's, to your point, that's where we're in emergency. That's where hair is on fire, DEFCON 5, we've got a problem.
DEFCON 4.
That's tiered. So
No, we made it to 5.
We made it to 5.
Since you got elected, Ricky.
So that's tier 1. Tier 2 is where you maybe put these other issues that are clearly important, but we want our legislators to understand the distinction. And as Ms. Carias and others pointed out, I mean, you've got the past president working on testing and accountability. I mean, he's made that a priority. He's chairman of education appropriations. He's a past super. He's a guy that can move that needle far better than anybody in this room, and we're just going to be cheerleading to a certain extent his efforts. So a two-tier approach as you work it out, that may take a lot of the pressure off. So we got our rifle on tier 1, and then tier 2 you can sort of throw whatever items that are of importance to this group. What I thought might be helpful, because we've got some folks that when it comes to legislative issues are graduate level, and some folks that are kind of starting out at 101. And so maybe to talk about where we came from in the playbook that we're basically recycling to a certain extent at this point, and so how we would hope it works. So back in the high growth heyday, as my realtor friends will remember dearly in Osceola County, we were just exploding. When you talk about an outlier, our growth was off the charts compared to the rest of the district. And I remember sitting in a room with Mr. Greer, Mr. Muse, and Ed Smallwood at the time, and they're just pulling their hair out, and there was no legislative strategy.
We were hiring 600 teachers a year.
And so this is back in 1998. I'm talking about it was crazy. So that was when Mr. Greer decided, hey, I'm going to get engaged, much like Mr. Weishauer and Mr. really decided I'm gonna make it a priority. And that was also the point where the county decided, or the district decided to hire a lobbyist, and we created OLE. And the strategy that we employed then, because Osceola is so different, is we created, Doug, we need him back because he's gonna correct me where I screw up, but that's where we came up with this concept of a high growth funding formula. But in order to make that work, it took time to educate the state leadership that Osceola is unique. It's not something you do overnight. And so to give you, for instance, we started in 2000 selling this concept of Osceola as an outlier. No action 2000, no action 2001. We're kind of watering the seed, we're planting and starting to see a sprout. In 2002, we were able to get the formula, and also the state was doing very well financially, and we got $8.5 million of extra money out of the high growth funding formula. In 2003, we got $3.4 million of extra money out of the high growth funding formula. In 2004, and also in 2002, we were able to get a loan from a couple of districts that were doing very well on their capital out of their classroom first money. Remember, the state was hurting in general for capital funding, and they passed, and I won't bore with the details. In 2004, the district's big challenge was operational dollars at that point, not capital, because we've been bringing these dollars in, and we're able to get an extra $1 to $5 million in operational that was rolled into your base. And then 2005, we got kind of our last bite at the high growth apple. We got $14 million funded through that high growth funding formula. And at that point, Osceola County, that's when growth started to slack, as the real estate folks know, and the high growth funding formula became invalid. If you we didn't meet our own qualifications because we weren't in that outlier position. Now we're back to that, and so the wheel is turned. The great news, the work that I can tell you that Mr. Greer and Mr. Bruce did to sell that concept, to work it and educate folks that, to Jay's point, all around the state that don't really care about Osceola. Everybody thinks they've got needs. Everybody's school district is squealing for money, and to convince them that was a major feat, and so the good news is, because that's in statute, we don't have to go resell it. We can say, the state saw this as a concern, all we're doing is bringing it up to modern standards. And so the nice thing is we're starting with a head start compared to where we were in the past. So to give you an idea of going from here, the good news is, probably the best thing we have going for us is the thing that makes your job hard, is we have a legitimate case. That's the best thing in the state. I know politics is important, and having the right legislators and the right connections and the right lobbyists is good, but having a legitimate case is pretty darn important. And so we've got that. That's the good news. The bad news for you is it means you've got too many kids and not enough money. We do have some challenges going forward, and just so you're thinking in terms of getting the expectations of where we need to water the seed. We have an outstanding legislative delegation. I can tell you that having worked with Senator Grimsley, the first female appropriations chair in the House. Brilliant. Kelly Stargell. She was, when we were freshmen together, she passed more bills than any other freshman in the House. She is great. Darren Soto, though he's in the minority party, when he was in the House, was one of the most effective members of the minority party. In the Senate, that has not changed. I can tell you that Representative LaRosa, and I'm not just bragging because Rebecca's here, is probably the best sophomore. There is nobody in his class sharper than Representative LaRosa, and I talked to these guys, and he is very, very well respected, and Mr. Cumbie, super smart guy and great. However, seniority matters, and our delegation are all sophomores and one freshman, and that's a challenge for us. When we made this high growth funding formula work, the guy who carried the water for us was Dan Webster, which is, I'm sure, a name that's not unfamiliar to this group. And so you're talking about one of the greatest legislators in the history of the state was carrying our water on this. That made a difference. And this is at the height of his power, is when we're bringing home $14 million. So seniority matters, and the good news is that's going to improve as our delegation, moves up the ranks of seniority. We're only going to get better. The other challenge we have is committee assignments matter, and our delegation doesn't serve on education committees. Senator Stargell is on the Education Appropriations Committee. Otherwise, nobody's on any education committees, and that is a challenge. That doesn't mean they can't be effective. I don't know that Senator Webster was on an education committee, but he was darn effective.
He was Dan Webster.
Dan Webster, yeah. So I'm just saying that it's not insurmountable, but it makes it a challenge. And then the final challenge, particularly in the short term, is I think this group is aware, Osceola County got a major ask before the legislature this year in their sensor project. They're looking for $25 million a year for 5 years to make it happen. That is a big lift, and so when we did this previously, the good news was all 4 local governments put Osceola's capital funding at the top of their list. You had St. Cloud, Kissimmee, the county all saying, you know what we want, delegation? We want you to bring home capital dollars for the schools. We're not necessarily in that environment at this point. Not that they're not all sympathetic, I'm sure it would be helpful, but they have interests in issues, particularly the county has got a big one. So just to give you an environment to deal with, it's going to be a challenging environment, not impossible, but.
So what's your formula for success
Right.
with that?
Well, our formula of success, the good news is that Chair Weishire and Mr. Bruce have already been hard at the work of, as Tim talked about, educating our delegation. The next step is we need to educate the leadership. And so that's kind of our next phase. We need to have the proposal put together that Ricky talked about with John. We have to have that proposal to sell the case of being an outlier. Our own people understand need. We need now to be able to convince the presiding officers, the appropriations chair, the education subcommittee chairs, and the substantive chairs. And the good news is that Mr. Bruce and I have relationships with all of those people, and we need to bring you, in many cases, to those meetings, to involve you where appropriate, to educate those folks and begin that process of giving it. And then there's a lot of other tactical things that I won't bore this group with that and I'm happy to share them if you're interested on what we need to do. So there is a plan, and we will be executing the plan of educating that leadership, either going with a bill or through an amendment or through some other processes to advance a version of the an updated high growth funding formula, and then more importantly, not only just because you change the law that's the easy part. Then you've got to fill the pot, and that becomes the challenging part. But we will work that process. From this group, the best thing that our school board can do is show up at the delegation meeting, go on the trip to Tallahassee, be available when we need to bring you to a meeting with legislators. In some cases, we've got a couple of leadership members that are fairly close to Osceola, and so I'd love to maybe bring some of those folks to Osceola. And that's where we can roll out the red carpet.
We can go to them.
In some cases, we're going to need to go to them. Or in some, we may catch, when you've got Eric Fresen, who I know he's from Miami. We probably don't want to go to Miami, but he drives right through this part of the state to get to Tallahassee. And he stopped and had lunch with me before on his way. We need him to come by and talk to him. So making yourselves available is where showing up is sometimes half the battle, and sort of following that good example that Chair Greer, right, is that he got involved. He became a statewide recognized leader in education policy, and that was helpful. So that was I've made notes on some of these things, and when you talk about the individual items, I'm happy. I'm sure Doug's happy to comment on how they might be positioned. But that's kind of the high level 1, 2 tiers. Second, history lesson of this is a long-term, this is a marathon, not a sprint. I probably could have just said those two things and saved you the
I think there's a few marathons here. I want to know how we're going to do the marathon this year.
Right. Do you want to answer that, or was that a rhetorical?
No, I'd love seeing how you're eager to answer. I want to hear your answer.
Well, no, I think that what we immediately need to do, we've got something to sell. I think the first question is leadership going to become, are they going to be interested? And so at this point, the first step is you got to make sure your own are on board. So that's the delegation. I know that Tim and Doug have already talked to these folks, and they are on board. I know that Ms. LaRosa is already, I think, at a bill and bill drafting, if I'm not mistaken. I know that Ms. Stargell has a bill and bill drafting. They're working on the mechanics that you have to do. But the next step is, be it with us, be it where we're bringing legislators, because it's a member-driven process. Our job is to help provide them the information to be successful. So that's where, when we have the information set up, that we can go with Representative LaRosa and sit down with the Fresens, the O'Tooles, the Chris Foley's and the Corcorans, and get them to buy off on this concept that Osceola is an outlier. If they become intrigued, if they buy off on it, and it's a priority for our members, then that's the process you use. And so that's the work that we get down to. We wanted to wait till this meeting took place and the board was officially had its positions before we go to that next level. We get our delegation on board on the 28th, and then you grind through that leadership, and the strategy is fluid. You could do a bill, you could do an amendment, you can do it through the appropriations process, and we'll figure that out depending where the best opportunities lie.
So what's the meeting on the 28th, Mike?
John, I got it wrong last time. I'm not going to blow it again. I think you guys are in the morning, as the governments are 10 to noon. Rebecca, you would know better. Is that?
Yeah,
So we're 10 o'clock.
9:30.
Okay.
And then St. Cloud goes first. I'm not
We
sure
have,
where
we have
we're going from
the
there.
state of education.
It's on the 28th.
I think that the plan, Ms. Hurd, is that you've got the school district last, so you'd be able to get back from the state of education in order to roll in and catch them before they're done.
Yes.
Doug, you have anything you want to add on this? I mean, you've been instrumental, as Mr. Horner pointed out, of
there's not
moving
a
this
lot
through
to
for a
add.
number of years.
A couple points, I guess. The delegation appreciates having focus on our priorities. If you throw a multitude of issues at them, they're not going to know where to put their energies and efforts or engage their relationships, and that's another key point. They're not going to be able to do this by themselves. They're going to have help from their friends in the legislature across the state. And so prioritization is key. Mr. Wheeler made a point that, you know, we need your help, this is a problem, but you gotta help them with the solution. You gotta give them the black and white and help them develop the strategy, work with them, what can we do to help them help us. And we have a good history of doing that. And we've, as you know, we've visited with each one of them. They're empathetic, appreciate the information we've given them. We've, Ms. Thacker, given them very, very stark numbers about how unique Osceola County finds itself. So I think we have a good beginning, you know, and we appreciate the opportunity to work with you on it.
How much does it hinder us by the fact that our local delegation, almost everybody, the exception of Rosa maybe, has a bigger base in other districts? So, in other words, if I got if I got 3/4 of my districts in Orange County, and they've got priorities, how do I get this little guy, this little sliver I got over here, how do I get their priority?
Well, it's a double-edged sword. And so, in some cases, obviously, Mr. La Rosa and Mr. Cortez are going to be laser focused on Osceola. However, let me say this: sometimes you want to have lots of folks because it gives you more numbers. So it can cut both ways. Senator Webster, who had a sliver of Osceola County. He had Celebration. That was it. I mean, he was barely clinging the Osceola delegation, and yet, because he was on our delegation, he carried our water and made it happen. So there was an example of an Orange County dominated Senate seat that came through. So the good news is, listen, clearly we're a very small fraction of Senator Stargell and Grimsley's seats, but they're so conscientious as individuals. I mean, Kelly's already agreed to sponsor, and just because of the caliber of people they are, I'm less concerned about. And clearly, Senator Soto, who represented Osceola County for so long, he's all in, and he does, to Jay's point, care about education because his wife is an educator. But I am not. That's not our challenge with our delegation. Our delegation's only getting better, and if you got rid of one of our senators and the other one had more of us, that might not actually help us because having two is good.
Yeah. And to that point, for example, Representative Cumby has a small piece, I think.
Yes.
But he is very true. What do I need to do for Osceola County? What do I need to do for the school district?
Okay.
You give him that one thing, and that makes it clear for him. If I do that, if I put whatever energy I have for Osceola County on that point, that's what I need to be doing.
And I've got Neil Cumby engaged in Celebration High School also. So
We feed Neil very well, and if you feed Neil,
And he's a very good friend
Yeah.
to the county.
Board, let's do this. Where are you guys at right now with regard to, we've had a number of things we've talked about. I said at the beginning, for me, the number one priority is what Mr. Horner just went through the whole history lesson on, which is this high growth formula. But it's all of us together. Is everyone in agreement that this needs to be our number one priority? You have options in front of you.
I am, and I actually agree how Mike said, talking about the tiered levels.
Sure.
Of saying, this is what we're going to really focus on, and yes, we do want these things to change, and that needs to be part of what what Mike does. But that has to be number one by a wide margin,
Right.
in my opinion.
And I guess I'm there too, but I just want both of you to look at me and tell me, you agree that our best option for success or increased funding is to hang it on the high growth formula? Or is there another approach?
My opinion is, at this stage of the game, it is our best approach. When we engage with leadership, if somebody presents an alternative, we're certainly open that if the Speaker of the House says, hey, I don't really love this, but I've got $10 million burning a hole in my pocket to do it this way, and I don't really expect that to take place. But if he were to say that,
But that's where I want to be sure that we're giving you the flexibility
Yeah.
right on the fly to
Exactly.
go.
That's why we need
And
the
that's,
flexibility.
I guess that's my only concern about saying that's it. I don't want you fighting that battle as it's going down in flames if you've got another one you can switch to and get. I don't care what it's called ultimately when the check comes. So I just want to make sure
Well, perhaps.
we're not going to do anything that I want us to be laser focused on getting the money. I don't necessarily want to be laser focused on a term that would limit you, I guess is my, and as long as you're not feeling limited.
I think we've got a difference between sort of the strategy and the tactics, and so overall, capital funding
It's the strategy.
is the strategy. Tactic is high growth.
Y'all are the tacticians anyway.
I'd just like to point out that in the event that they want to give funding, let's just call it funding, I don't care, just want to give money, I don't care what they call it. And typically there's the golden rule, who's got the gold makes the rules. And maybe they want to give money for technology upgrades, because you got all this statewide online testing, and what they don't realize is you could pull a semi-trailer up to a lot of these schools with all the computers in the world, because schools don't have the infrastructure to support all the computers. Or we've got a perfect example with Michigan Avenue Elementary that districts, forget about high growth, districts throughout the state they got schools 40 and 50 years old they need to replace because the schools just are no longer physically able, they're obsolete. So however you get us money for improving our facilities, be it for capital construction, replacing existing schools, to enhance existing schools, et cetera, I'm not married to high growth funding, which if that's how you get it, great. But if that's vanilla and something else is chocolate, that's fine. And something else is strawberry, that's fine too. Just bring us back the money and we'll be happy.
I think we're saying this.
You see, Jay, I think that's also part of those discussions. If we have Chairman O'Toole or Chairman Fresno here and we're talking and they've got a concept in their mind that, hey, by the way, I am interested in technology funding, and since I'm here, let me tell you, here's a pot that you might want to capitalize. Absolutely, as you work through the process. I mean, we did that to a certain extent, and I'm going to put this one. I'm going to give Doug the far lion's share of the credit when it came from a target of opportunity on workforce funding. Osceola County was really getting the short end of the stick on that, and it happened to be, and Doug discovered that they were going through a process of reforming that, and we jumped on it, and Osceola made out very, very well, and that was a target of opportunity that brought millions to the district. So I think as we're engaging with the folks that are in education leadership, they've got agendas, they've got plans, and where there are targets of opportunity, you want to capitalize.
But the point, and also, they may decide that after-school and recreational activities are the most important things for kids. So if they wanted to give us money just to build more gyms, not that that's what I want, but whatever we get is more than we have.
So why don't we go about it this way, and maybe we could look at it from someone making a motion that the number one legislative priority for the Osceola School Board in giving direction to our lobby team would be increased capital funding for the school district.
I think you have unanimous consent.
I'll make a motion to approve.
Exactly. Good job. Good job.
Capital and facility funding is the number one priority for the Osceola County School
Call it
District.
whatever you want to
I'm
call
gonna
it.
paint it with a broad brush.
Yeah.
So that facility could be, just capital and facility funding.
Okay, so why don't we go, and you are right, we do have unanimous consent, I believe.
Yes.
Board, everyone's on, so we don't need to go in that direction, because Ricky's right. So with that will pass, that the number one priority for the school district then, or school board, is increased capital funding for Osceola County. And then to the point that's been made, which tool you use to get us there, we'll leave that to your capable hands to figure that out and work with us as need be on that, okay?
And the only thing I would ask is, I know
We don't, it was
I certainly
everyone.
want to help wherever I can help. I'm probably going to let you guide.
Everyone's.
But we need to make sure y'all are keeping us informed too. So, the last thing I want to happen is me to walk in somewhere and say something different than what you just said, or any of us. So,
And you said the 28th of January?
Yes.
That is the day of
Delegation.
the State of Education?
Yeah, we're going after the state of education. We have delegation.
Your brown suit that day, Ricky.
My brown one?
Let's move on then, because
Please.
we've identified that will be our number one priority, but let's then talk about some additional priorities that we may want to just have that we're working towards. Again, there were 3 priority issues that were brought up. I'll go to just briefly the ELL waiver. As Mr. Boyd had pointed out, there's been some success there already. I'm not really sure if there's anything additional that we need to do at this time. I think we're good to go there, so we don't have to deal with that.
That's as good as it's going to get.
Right, exactly. We can go then to the sustained accountability reform. That was the point Mr. Boyd was making about needing additional time to get some of these things in place. And then we do have the additional ones that Mr. Wheeler had brought up as well. Mr. Boyd, my only point, it's not directed at you, I guess, as a whole, is when we look at this one, we do have FSBA, Florida Superintendent Association, so on and so forth, already looking at this. Board, I guess, what is your thoughts on this becoming a second priority or third or fourth priority for us? Is this really what we want to do? And then also, let's not forget that Mr. Wheeler took time to put some things forward as well. Maybe one of those should be a higher priority for us than that. And then remember last year there were the ones that had to do with SREF standards and collaboration with charter schools. My personal opinion, if you look at the last 3 pages of your packet where it says collaboration with charter schools, the way that the proposal is, schools shall collaborate, charter schools shall collaborate with school districts. I'm not sure that that's ever going to go anywhere, that we're going to be able to say that you have to go in this area. I think we've built a very cordial relationship as much as we can with charter school companies that are coming into this area and nonprofits that want to get started. They do meet with our facilities team and say, where's the growth, what can we do? It doesn't mean they listen, it doesn't mean they go where we want them to go, but the dialogue at least exists at this point.
We're not having trouble with them. Jay was in the meeting as well in Tampa. Was it Palm Beach County? They're the ones where they have a very contentious relationship with the public and charter. They're building charter schools right next to public schools, and they're having some trouble there.
The good news is, we're not them.
Right.
Yeah, that's true. But I think that's where some of that language is coming from. Yeah.
Well, and I say that just because I want to make sure that we cover everything. If we're good, we're not going to deal with that, board.
When you talk about a second tier, Tim, and Mike, and everybody, the second tier really, the top of that second tier, not to belabor the point, has to be money for wages and benefits. Dollars you can get for operations or for cap. Those are the 2 pots of money, is operations and capital. You can't commingle. So, which is not to suggest that these other things are not important, but really, we're sending you there to bring home the bacon, so to speak. And we need money.
Clarence brought that up, talking about operating in capital. Any kind of money would be great.
Right.
You brought up a point, Jay, about the wages and about how teachers, and one of their largest complaints is benefits. I'd actually disagree with you a little bit. I think the largest complaint I get from teachers is just the extremely high stress level, all the testing. We can't teach. You're evaluating us 400 times a school year. That's what I get from teachers. They'd be fine with their wages. They complain about the benefits. But that's the complaint I get the most, is the testing system that we have and the enormous amount of stress that we're putting on our teaching faculty.
And again, that goes back to, if we can get, which I doubt if we can, no mandated testing prior to March and eliminate, the state should not be evaluating our teachers. Principals need to evaluate. Teachers, principals need to evaluate the teachers, because what the state has now isn't working. If it was, 90% of the teachers wouldn't be rated highly effective.
Yeah.
It ain't rocket science. You've also got, just to illustrate it even further, you can be a principal at an A school and be rated, the administration can be rated unsatisfactory also with their evaluation instrument. But they're not complaining about it. The state really gets them, get an A school of principals by doing something right. Any relief you can get us from the Department of Education for the metrics, because they really don't get that.
And Jay, let me set expectations fairly to you guys. In all honesty, and Doug, you might kick me under the tail. Osceola's not going to be a huge player in this. I think you want to put it on your list. I'd put it in your second tier. Make your assessment issue the top of the list. It's a big deal. It's being addressed. No one is going to come to Mike Warner or Doug Bruce, or frankly anybody in this room, and really the decision aren't going to be asking our opinions on it. None of our members are on those committees. They're going to see the final product when it hits the floor. Put it on your list, but it would be obvious malpractice for me to roll in here next year and say, hey, by the way, I fixed your assessment problem if it gets changed, because frankly it's going to be dealt with at another. But we'll be at those meetings, and when people ask, "Where's Osceola?"
Yes, but Mike, to your point though, and Ricky, you brought up a really good point. In our legislative delegation meeting, they need to hear it from us.
Correct.
Because they're going to get it repetitively in Tallahassee, but they need to know that Osceola County School Board, this is important.
What I like to do with the board's blessing is work with Mr. Boyd, and when we put together your presentation for the delegation meeting, my expectation is if I'm reading the temperature of this board, it's gonna be 80% capital funding, and then in the time, if we've got 20 minutes, I keep bringing whatever time the school district's got in our, we're gonna talk 8% about capital funding, be ready with the answers that you talk about. Because I remember clear as day when Senator Webster zinged, I think it was David Stone. I remember that moment, and we don't want to leave Mr. Weishire hanging out like that. So we're going to, we're going to spend, but then you have the rest of your list, and with that 20% of time, you're able to roll through it and put accountability on that. And you'll hit it so they hear it with the chorus, but I don't think you need to expand on why. They know, they all just got done running for re-election, they know it's an issue.
Right. Mr. Phelps, I want to come to you though as well, if you had anything you want to add to this conversation before we get too far along.
I actually agree with everything that's being said. Obviously, funding is going to be our highest priority. The accountability and changing into assessments and that sort of thing. I believe we've got associations working on that with great interest. If we can pipe in and support that, which I know that our superintendent is doing, as well as other superintendents in the state, I think that's definitely a positive thing. But I think our main priority needs to be securing some funds to help with our growth.
Okay. Ms. Karras, you wanted to just make a brief comment?
Yeah, because what I've learned, exactly like what Mike was saying, when you're meeting with these leadership, especially because they understand the difference between the Osceola County problem and the statewide problem. But I think it's just like what Jake said, you need to say that these statewide problems that you're dealing with, this is where we stand on it. And just like you have that list of how much money you need, we need this. When it comes to these statewide problems, Osceola County stands with this. And so that they have it, they've heard it from you, they understand you're paying attention and you know what you're setting with, but you become part of the bigger voice. But they need to hear that statement, I think, from you.
Agreed. Okay, so let's just try to pare this down a little bit, and I think we may already have. Number one, we know we're dealing with the capital funding. Number two, we've had conversation about whether it's wages, benefits, otherwise, but really, to me, I'd go back to the same type of comment we're making about capital funds. If it's additional appropriations that are going to be utilized in our general fund, however we however we get them or however we can spend them, however that's going to end up benefiting us or other school districts, that's good in and of itself. I don't know, again, that we need to really pin that down or put any box
Just
around
eliminate the word capital from the first one. Let's call it funding in general.
No, I like capital on that first one.
Because that's where we're the outlier.
No, that's true.
Yeah. Mr. Wheeler,
Not operational.
just being cognizant of the list that you gave, is there anything else on here that you want to make sure you made extra points on, or are you good?
I think the only thing that, it came up last year and it really resonated with the legislative delegation. And I'm not suggesting that we want it, but it really comes down to the point of building new schools, is they may be very open to SREF relief, if, only because if you can build a school for 40 million versus 70 million, that, and you can build it faster, that is, that rings with people. It's good for the economy, it's good for the school district. Over 50 years, is that school the right school we want? I don't know, but we got needs now. So they may be open to that.
Everybody's on board with SRF, the leadership's on board with SRF. Here's the problem, I've talked to Chair President about it. They're on board, but when you ask for the list of the specific SRF items you want relief on, the list starts turning into nothing. And that's where you get a problem is, you go, okay, well, not as many firearms, I'm pulling out of the air. Well, no, don't get rid of firearms, kids burn up. And so as you start doing the SRF standards that you take away, the best way to be helpful in that is if you come up with a list of these specific, when you say SRF in general, it does no good. If you say these 10 SRF items we want relief on, now we're talking, but that's, because it was an issue you had last year, and I went to Eric and said, hey man, he goes, I'm on board, give me your list. And I think I talked to the superintendent, and I know it was
Clyde, do we have a list of the most expensive ones? Or is
Yeah,
it-
we should have.
But to your point, Mike, what you can
No, I
do,
know.
what we can do is we can say, instead of SREF, the Florida Building Code is good, but these are the ed specs we would add to the building code so that it's suitable for housing students.
I think if Mr. Wells can put together a list of SREF that we want relief on, that would be
Yeah.
really helpful.
The other thing, aside from the building envelope and the systems of the building, are the requirements for your core facilities that they outline, the square footage of what your core is gonna be based upon the occupancy. So that's where a charter school gets by. Their classrooms may be smaller than what we're constructing. It's not always just the building systems. They still have to build to the Florida Building Code. But there are some more stringent requirements on that side of it as well. But we'll certainly, yes, absolutely.
I guess the
In addition to the size of the land that we've got to purchase to be able to construct on in the first place.
Right, there's a lot of requirements that they have in there that do hinder us where a charter does not.
I guess the question I would have is, can we get something back for us to consider maybe by the next board meeting, which is the 20th, that will identify what those things are with some sort of an idea of what that cost is associated versus what we would save, et cetera. And I don't know that you can extrapolate that necessarily, but if we can get something, that's a good point. I mean, if we get something so we can see it and it makes sense, then we can have further discussion next board meeting.
Did you hear that, Clyde?
Yes, and I think the board would have to, any recommendation that we would be looking at modifying or going, to bring forward as a change to ESRA, something the board needs to take into consideration because it's all, like a Lego set, it's all together. I mean, ESRA is a very complex document, and it's gonna be hard to just pull certain things out and say, well, if we got relief from this, we can still do this.
Well, if they can build 30% cheaper, I don't care about getting the whole 30% because you're gonna be finding outlets or something.
Yeah.
Can you find, the 80-20 rule? Can you find the 80% or the 20% of things that make up 80% of that money fairly easily or not? I don't know.
Yeah, yes, and we can go to our consultants. We have construction managers and architects that could help us with that. Architects.
I know I talked
Because
with,
they build,
Yeah.
Shingle Schultz or somebody may
Build
design a
both.
charter school and one of our schools, and they can certainly tell you from that building side of what, yes, we can put it together, but I don't know that, we want to be, from a district standpoint, we want to be aware of what we're asking to take out.
Here would be my point on this, and we started this conversation, and in fact, we brought it up at the delegation meeting last year as well, just kind of as an aside. And oh, by the way, some relief with SRF standards would be helpful.
Senator Sturgill was all over like that.
Yeah, she wanted more information. So I think, here's how I look at all of this, is we know what our priorities are. SRF relief or an amendment to the...
Getting money.
Yeah, an amendment to how stringent it is for us to operate under does end up solving some of the number one priority for us, which is that capital funding. So if we can build it for less money than our...
Speed of construction.
Yeah, then we don't need $240 million, whatever it is, to deal with it. So I think what we do is we just continue that conversation. I'm not convinced that it's anything that's going to happen this time around, but we put it out there last year. We can bring it up this year and back it up with a little bit more data to continue that going forward. It may be something that we bring forward through also the Florida School Boards Association, have some conversation there. We know that they have a priority that they're trying to go with to get charter schools to come up to SREF. That's the wrong approach in my opinion. So maybe we can help frame that conversation at the School Board Association and say you're looking at it the wrong way and kind of flip the script on that and maybe reshape the conversation so we can find success in the out years.
Here's what I would say. Here's what I'm thinking, Clyde. I'm thinking we've got a prototype, say, for a high school or middle school, okay? And our cost of construction for this high school and middle school in today's dollars is $50, $60, $70 million. If we could build this school and take out elements A through G, let's say, that $70 million school now is $45 million. and you show, and you can do that actual comparison. I think to your point, Mike, that's pretty black and white. I mean, there's no gray area with that. And I don't know, in a week, if we can get a Schenkel or BRPH or CT Chew or whomever to help us with that.
And let me take some of the pressure on your time constraint. I don't think you need to roll into the delegation with this. You could, because once again,
But it's
this
more
is good-
impactful if you have
This
it.
is smart. Put it on the list. If you do get pushback, Senator Sherrill, hey, give me some. We're working on that. When you do this, it's not going to be a standalone bill. It'll be something that would get rolled into whatever package. So there's the time constraint is not. The focus is to have our slam dunk proposal on the Capitol. We can put SREP and get by. We need it before session, to have those specifics to give leadership.
Does having these SREF advancements or taking away, does that help us with selling the capital funding? Like, hey, we want to build more schools, and we can show you how we can do it a little bit cheaper.
And faster.
To a certain extent, no. In that
Okay.
the message we're sending is we're an outlier. Osceola is unique. Help us resolve this uniqueness. SREF is universal, and this is not an easy nut to crack. I don't just because there's interest. There's a reason you have all these standards, and they've been created over the years, but. Taking out any piece of that Lego, or maybe it's more like a Jenga tower, I don't know. But that's, I wouldn't put a lot of our
But to your
balls in that
but to your
basket.
If you
point,
will,
Mike,
hold on one second, though. Mr. Cavaney wanted to kind of weigh in on this a little bit earlier, too.
I just want to say, when you're looking at the cost savings between a charter and one of our public schools, is we build for longevity. We build a 50-year school. If we want to relax those standards, we're building something that's going to last a least amount of time. Your capital impact would be more in the long run. So I want you just to use caution on, do we really want to build wood stick frame schools again? That's what you could do if you relaxed SREF standards. It's not the best thing. It's certainly not what we would want from a facilities standpoint. We want longevity in our school.
Mark, we'd have an ed spec. I mean, we're not building houses. But the point I want to make is, Mike, you made a good point. It's a universal issue. And one of the ways we may want to consider couching it also is maybe you don't want to relax SREF for districts within 30 miles of the coast because they're more prone to hurricanes, et cetera. I mean, there are those kinds of considerations.
Once again, it goes back to what you're relaxing. I mean, if
Right.
if it's a square footage issue, coast doesn't enter into it. If it's what we're building with cement or sticks, it's a different.
Right, I agree. Mr. Wells?
Just from a facility and a district staff standpoint, okay, and being an old Florida cracker here, tell me why there's a double standard. That's what I'd like the state to explain of public schools and charter schools. It's the same money going into it, but there's different standards. They're all public children going to these schools. These are not private schools. Charter schools are opening in strip centers right now. If they can get a storefront and a few desks in there, they've got a school. We cannot do that. Sure, we can try to change maybe the standards within SREP, but just why is there a double standard? Why do they get to operate like that? We're using local money to build schools. We're not getting state funding right now to build schools. We're using impact fees. The state has they're not giving us money to build schools. So why are we building to their standard? That's the biggest question, I think.
Okay, thank you.
The
Mike,
double standard.
did you have something you were going to add or no? Okay, all right. So let's just make sure we're all on the same page. This is not something that we're really pushing. This is just something that seeing some change or relief in SREF down the line would help lend to relief as a whole for districts across the state when it comes to the exorbitant costs that we face with having to construct schools. We'll get some backup material. We'll arm you guys with it so that you have it, and as that conversation evolves, we'll see where it goes. This is not going to be, from where I'm gathering and where I stand, not going to be an Osceola County thing. It's just one of those things that is just smart for all school districts throughout the state.
Other
and we're
school
one of
districts don't need this necessarily because they don't have the capital needs we have.
Right, but we're going to address that. And I just see it as, I get it, but I just see that
They're not
we're
gonna
going
care.
to address it in a different way. They may not, but it's still costing, the same amount of money to build a school when they have
If they
to.
don't
We're
need
not
schools,
being-
they don't see when it's good comes down.
Sure, no, I get that, but there are other districts that are still having to build schools. So, okay. Anything else, Mr. Boyd, Mr. Phelps, good?
Not on this. not
Mr.
this.
Bruce?
I think, just, I want to explore this graphic a little bit, so we can kind of talk about
That comes from,
why the
Mike.
county's having that kind of growth in that population, and is that 100% of the growth? What are the other components of the growth? I think would be helpful to us.
Okay.
If we can get at that, so.
Okay. Mike, anything additional? No. Okay. Mr. Brown, did you have something that you needed to address while we were here?
Yes, thank you. If Tanya, if you could have the minutes reflect that I'm requesting a need for an executive session, if we could schedule it either before or after, at your pleasure, the upcoming school board meeting. We'll put it on the agenda in the usual way, have a court reporter. We've got a proposal that's consistent with discussion in an executive session that occurred shortly before the new board took over, so there'll be a little bit of briefing in the executive session for the new members. And it's the case of Velez, V-E-L-E-Z, versus the Osceola School Board.
Okay, very good. And board, if you're good, we'll go ahead and put that on for our next upcoming school board
Yes.
meeting to do that afterwards.
Sure. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Brown. Mr. Booth, anything additional?
No, are we going to settle then on, have we settled in on our second tier? Or are we gonna have John bring us something else?
No, I feel like we have, but for clarity, top tier, obviously capital, second tier was additional funding when it comes to operations in the district, and whether that's allocated in, resources, students, wages, benefits, whatever, then we'll leave that alone, and then SREF will be touched on as well.
Again,
Those-
going back
We
to the first
we
one.
do not wanna add the accountability reform,
we're gonna ride on that, I think, with everybody else.
but we're not, we
think
don't
you
wanna
can
add
do the
that,
second
we
tier,
need to add
that's
that to
fine.
our second tier, I think.
I agree.
It's up to everybody.
Yeah, just to be,
It was decided that we could weigh in on it. I mean,
just to be in harmony with everybody else,
and-
yeah.
and
Yeah.
Just to have, I think that's a very legitimate second tier.
But I think that going back to the first tier, capital/facility funding. Because they, however they want to paint that picture.
And I think that's y'all's
But the
charge.
district,
Other people are gonna
everyone here at the
figure that
district
out.
seems to think, they have it ranked number one. I think the number 1 and 2 needs to be changed here on theirs, and they may not have ranked them, but I do believe accountability reform, and for all the reasons that they have put in their packet here.
And I think it's a very strong issue, but I think it's one that's being carried by,
It's a good second tier.
there's a
I
whole
just
bunch
want
of,
it to be
there's a whole bunch
part-
of people carrying it.
Sure.
Not that they're gonna work on, not that Mike's gonna
Right.
spend a lot of time on it, but it will be part of what we do agree, I think, with all these folks.
Okay, so then
That's all right with
how
you
it'll
guys.
lay out is our number one priority is capital funding, second will just be additional funding as a whole for operations of school districts, SREF standards relief, and then joining in with our counterparts with regard to accountability reform. Okay, and relief. Good?
Yes, that sounds
Okay.
great.
Board, if there's nothing else at this time, we will stand adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you, John, for all
Have a
that.
good weekend, everybody. And in case anybody cares, OHS is playing Celebration, and that Celebration.